On Christmas Eve, when families gather to celebrate warmth and love, mine handed me a suitcase and locked the door behind me. The words may sound simple now, but the moment they were spoken, they split my world apart. The snow was already falling, soft, thin flakes dissolving into the wet cobblestones outside. I remember how the street lamp just beyond the gate flickered, stuttering like a candle about to go out. It should have been beautiful, like the beginning of a quiet winter dream. Instead, it was the setting for my exile. Inside the house, the air was heavy with the smell of roasted turkey, honey-glazed ham, and cinnamon-scented candles that my mother used to insist on lighting every December. Golden fairy lights wrapped around the tree blinked in soft rhythm, throwing glimmers of warmth across glass ornaments that reflected distorted images of everyone gathered inside. Laughter had been flowing like wine only minutes earlier, but when the sharp words were spoken, all of it died at once, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my skin like ice. "You don't belong here anymore. Get out." The voice came from my brother, his tone clipped, certain, and almost rehearsed. His hand pointed toward the door, and in the other he carried the same glass of wine he had been sipping all evening. The rim left a faint red stain on his lips, like he had been feasting on someone else's blood. I didn't speak at first. My eyes drifted almost against my will to the coffee table near the sofa where I had placed my gift. I had chosen it carefully, wrapped it in silver paper, tied with a ribbon that caught the golden light beautifully. It lay there, untouched, forgotten, while everyone's eyes avoided it. That simple unopened box said everything. They didn't care. They never had. The silence stretched painfully. I noticed small details no one else did. The way my cousin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, pretending to sip from an empty glass. The way my aunt smirked faintly before hiding her expression behind a napkin. My father, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor, unable to meet my eyes. And my mother, my own mother, stood by the kitchen doorway, gripping a serving spoon like a weapon, her knuckles white, her face unreadable. The handle of the suitcase dug into my palm as I picked it up. They had placed it neatly by the door, as if this decision had been planned long before tonight. The leather was cold, the zipper slightly frayed on the edges. I had carried this suitcase on better days. Days when I was the one traveling back home to surprise them, never imagining they would one day use it as my dismissal. My chest burned, but no tears came. I would not cry in front of them. I forced myself to breathe evenly, each inhale carrying the scent of pine from the Christmas tree, each exhale releasing nothing but silence. "I see," I said quietly. My voice was steady, though it felt like my heart was cracking inside me. "This is the gift you've chosen for me this year." No one replied. Somewhere in the background, a Christmas carol kept playing from the old stereo, the cheerful notes of Silent Night twisting into something almost cruel. I glanced at each of them again, memorizing their faces under the soft amber glow of the fairy lights. My brother's defiance, my cousin's unease, my aunt's smug satisfaction, my father's cowardice, my mother's cold indifference. These were portraits I would not forget. And then, almost instinctively, my hand brushed against the small box still hidden in the pocket of my coat. A separate gift, a personal one, wrapped hastily, without the silver ribbons or glittering paper. No one knew it was there. No one needed to. Not yet. I stepped toward the door, my shoes pressing into the rug that had once been ours, once part of my childhood memories. My fingers grazed the brass doorknob, cool to the touch, and I opened it slowly. A gust of cold winter air rushed in, sweeping through the living room, making the flames in the fireplace flicker. For a second, it felt like the house itself was reacting, like it too disapproved of what they had just done. Behind me, someone muttered, "Good riddance." I didn't turn to see who it was. Their voices no longer mattered. The snow crunched beneath my shoes as I stepped outside, suitcase rolling heavily across the uneven stones. The air smelled of smoke from distant chimneys, sharp and biting against my lungs. The cold bit into my face, but I welcomed it. It felt honest, unlike the warmth I had just left behind, the false warmth that hid daggers beneath the tablecloth. I looked back only once. Through the frosted window, I saw them gathering again near the table, laughing too quickly, too loudly, pretending as though my departure meant nothing. The silver-wrapped gift still sat unopened where I had left it. a small, silent monument to my rejection. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. The street was empty except for that flickering lamp and the snow swirling beneath it. The world outside was dark, but at least it was mine. I whispered into the night, words that only the snowflakes heard. They thought they ended me. But Christmas had other plans, and with that, I walked into the darkness, the suitcase wheels rattling like distant thunder, the unopened gift still heavy in my pocket, its secret waiting. The cold of that Christmas night lingered in my chest long after I stepped into the street. My breath came out in pale clouds, dissolving into the air like whispers that no one would hear. For a moment, I stood beneath that flickering lamp, suitcase heavy in my hand, snow dusting my coat, and I let the silence wash over me. But then, the silence wasn't silence anymore. It carried echoes, memories. They returned in waves like the fog rising from my lips, thick and unstoppable. And just like that, the present dissolved into the past. I remembered the first sacrifice. It was years ago. My siblings were younger then, barely in high school, their eyes still filled with dreams. Dreams that cost money, tuition fees, uniforms, books stacked higher than the shelves could hold. I was already working by then. I took double shifts at the factory, the air thick with oil and smoke, the machines screaming louder than my thoughts. My hands grew calloused, my back ached, but every paycheck went straight into their future, not mine, always theirs. I told myself it was worth it, that the sound of their laughter, the sight of them studying under a proper lamp instead of candlelight, would be my reward. I remember nights when my stomach twisted in hunger, yet I'd tell them I'd already eaten at work. The truth was, I'd given my share of dinner money to cover the electricity bill. I would sit in the corner, pretending to sip tea from an empty mug while they filled their plates. My mother noticed once. She asked softly, "You didn't eat, did you?" I smiled, forcing my lips to stretch wider than the truth. "I'm fine, Ma." "Really?" She never pressed again. Maybe she believed me. Maybe she wanted to. There was a winter colder than most when the roof leaked above my bed. I saved quietly, choosing not to buy myself a new coat, so we could patch the roof before it collapsed. I shivered through nights with blankets too thin, while my younger brother wore the thick jacket I should have had. He never knew, he still doesn't. Yet, it wasn't always bitter. There were moments that almost glowed. I can still smell the stew my mother cooked on Sunday nights, ginger and garlic simmering slowly, the steam filling the kitchen like a warm fog. We didn't have much, but her food made us feel rich. I can still hear the crackle of the old kerosene lamp that lit our table, see the way shadows danced across the walls while my siblings bent over their books. I sat with them sometimes, even though I was exhausted from work, just to keep them company. Those nights, laughter carried us. Even poverty felt like something we could survive together. Christmases back then were humble, but beautiful. One year, I bought my little sister a second-hand doll. Its hair was tangled, one arm slightly loose, but I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with string. The way her face lit up when she opened it, it could have been diamonds. My brother once carved me a wooden keychain in return, rough, uneven, but shaped like a heart. I kept it on my keys for years until the paint wore off and the wood cracked. I never told him it broke. To me, it never did. But if I'm honest, the red flags were already there. Small, almost invisible threads of disrespect that I ignored because I believed love would cover them. I remember the first time they excluded me from a family decision. It was about selling a piece of land my grandfather had left us. I had been working all week, barely home, when I overheard my uncle saying, "We don't need to involve him. He'll just complicate things." They sold it without my input, without even telling me until after the papers were signed. I swallowed my anger then, convincing myself it was just an oversight. But the truth is, it was the beginning of something far darker. There were whispers too. Late nights when I returned from work, I'd hear voices from behind closed doors. My name spoken like a burden, like an obligation. He should do more. He owes this family. I would pause, standing silently in the hallway, my hand hovering over the doorknob, listening. And when the conversation stopped, I'd step inside, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. They would smile at me then, too wide, too bright, masks slipping back into place. Slowly, their gratitude faded into expectation. My help was no longer seen as sacrifice, but as duty. If I gave them money, it was just what you should do. If I stayed home one evening instead of working overtime, I was lazy. If I asked for a moment of rest, they told me others had it harder. They drained me, piece by piece, and I let them, because I thought that was love. One image still haunts me, an old family photo we kept in the hallway. Everyone smiling, arms wrapped around one another, captured in a moment that pretended to be unity. But when I looked closely, I saw myself half cut out of the frame. The photographer hadn't centered the shot, and I stood at the edge, only half my body visible. I used to laugh about it, joking that I didn't matter enough to fit in. But over time, it began to feel like prophecy. That photo told the truth long before they ever did. And then there's the mug, a simple ceramic mug with a crack running down its side. I used it every morning for tea, the warmth of the liquid seeping into my hands like comfort. Everyone else eventually moved on to nicer cups, new sets that matched, but I kept that cracked mug. It reminded me of resilience, how something broken could still hold warmth. I still have it, tucked away in a box, though no one else even remembers it existed. The weight of those years sits heavy in me even now. Nostalgia twisted with sorrow. I gave them everything, my time, my dreams, my youth. And in return, what did I receive? Silence, indifference, dismissal. Sometimes I wonder if they ever noticed how tired I looked, how the lines on my face deepened before their time. Sometimes I wonder if they cared. But then I remember, it doesn't matter if they noticed. What matters is they chose not to. As I stand beneath the cold December sky, suitcase at my side, I realize something. Every sacrifice I made was a seed planted. Some seeds grow into flowers, others grow into thorns, and my family had watered the wrong kind. The fog of memory clears and the present rushes back. My hand brushes against the small gift box in my pocket, still unopened, still waiting. My breath comes out slow, deliberate, as if even the night is listening. They think my story ended tonight with a suitcase and a slammed door. But they have no idea that all those years of sacrifice, every meal skipped, every dream buried, every silence endured, were not wasted. They were stored, collected, waiting, and soon they will see the cost of what they've done. The house was alive with sound that night. Glasses clinking, laughter rolling like waves against the walls, the faint hum of Christmas carols spilling from the old stereo in the corner. On the surface, it looked like the perfect celebration, the kind of night families wait for all year. But beneath it all, beneath the glittering lights and polished smiles, something colder pulsed. I remember stepping through the doorway, suitcase wheels rattling softly against the hardwood floor. The living room glowed with golden light from the fireplace. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering and restless, as if the house itself was uneasy. I paused for a moment, taking it all in, the rich smell of roasted meat, the sharp sweetness of mulled wine, the tang of orange peel floating in simmering cider. It should have smelled like home. Instead, it stung, like salt pressed into a wound. I had come with hope, fragile as it was. Hope that the years of sacrifice meant something. Hope that my place at the table was still mine. But even before the words were spoken, I could feel it. The shift in the air, the tension hiding beneath their laughter. My brother was the first to break the silence that mattered. He stood near the head of the table, his wine glass glinting in the firelight, his posture too rigid for someone celebrating. His eyes found mine, cold and sharp, and then he said it. "You don't belong here anymore. Get out." The room froze, forks stilled above plates, mid-air. The clinking of glasses faltered. Even the fire seemed to quiet itself, the crackle subdued into silence. I stared at him, my hand tightening instinctively on the suitcase handle. The leather cut into my palm, grounding me, keeping me from floating away into the disbelief that threatened to swallow me. "Excuse me?" My voice came out softer than I expected, calm enough to sound almost detached. "You heard me," he replied, his tone rehearsed, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "You're nothing but a burden. Always have been." His words sliced deeper than he knew. My gaze flicked around the room, searching. My cousin avoided my eyes, pretending to sip from an empty glass. My aunt pressed her lips together, but I caught the ghost of a smirk curling at the corners. My father stared into his plate as though the food might offer him answers he didn't have the courage to say aloud. And my mother, my own mother, stood by the kitchen door, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. She didn't speak. Silence was her verdict. The air turned thick, suffocating. The faint notes of a Christmas hymn played on, cruel in its cheer. Silent night, holy night. The irony. Burned. I drew in a slow breath, and as I did, my eyes landed on the table. My gift, wrapped neatly in silver paper, ribbon tied with careful precision, lay pushed to the side, ignored, unopened. It wasn't just paper and string. It was the weight of my love, dismissed. A sudden clatter jolted me. A glass of wine tipped, spilling red across the white tablecloth. The liquid spread like blood, creeping toward the silver cutlery, staining everything in its path. Nobody moved to clean it. Nobody dared. It was as though the wine itself carried my humiliation. I looked back at my brother. His face, once so familiar, seemed foreign now, hard lines carved where warmth used to live. "Is this what you all want?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the storm building inside. No one answered. Their silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to let anger spill out. No shouting, no begging. Dignity would be my weapon. My heart may have been breaking, but I would not hand them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, slow. My eyes scanned their faces once more. I memorized everything: the smirk, the averted gaze, the cowardice. These images would stay with me, etched into memory like scars. Finally, I set my suitcase upright, the wheels locking into place with a sharp click. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, brushing against the small box hidden there. The gift I hadn't revealed, the secret no one knew. Its weight was light, but its meaning was heavy. I let my fingers rest on it for just a moment, a quiet reminder that this story wasn't ending. It was only shifting. "I see," I said softly, my tone calm enough to unsettle them. "So, this is the gift you've chosen for me this year." No one spoke. The only reply was the faint hiss of the fire, the occasional pop of wood splintering in the hearth. I picked up my suitcase and turned toward the door. My footsteps were muffled against the rug, but in my head, they echoed like thunder. When I reached the threshold, I placed my hand on the brass doorknob. Its chill seeped into my skin, anchoring me in this moment. Behind me, someone muttered under their breath, too low for courage, but loud enough to wound. "Good riddance." I didn't turn. I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I opened the door, slowly, deliberately. A rush of icy air swept in, making the fairy lights tremble, the flames shiver. For a heartbeat, it felt like the house itself recoiled from what they had done. Snowflakes drifted onto my coat, melting instantly, leaving damp marks that looked like tears I refused to shed. I stepped out into the night, suitcase wheels dragging behind me, their rattle harsh against the frozen ground. The gate creaked when I pushed it open, its rusted hinges groaning as if mourning with me. I paused once, just once, to glance back through the frosted window. They had already resumed their laughter, forced and hollow, their voices raised too high to mask their guilt. And there, still untouched, still unopened, sat my silver-wrapped gift, a monument to my rejection. I turned away. The snow crunched beneath my shoes, the night swallowing me whole. My breath fogged in the air, each exhale a vow. "This will not be forgotten," I whispered to myself, the words carried away by the winter wind. And though they couldn't hear it, though they believed the chapter had closed, in truth, it had only begun. The apartment was small, barely more than 4 walls and a window that rattled each time the wind howled outside. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the radiator clanged like old bones in the night. It was nothing like the warm house I had just been cast out of, yet it became my sanctuary. I sat at the edge of the bed, suitcase open at my feet, belongings scattered as if my life itself had been emptied carelessly onto the floor. Among the clothes, tucked into the inner lining of my coat, was the small gift box I had carried with me all evening. It had been meant for them, though I never had the chance to give it. Now it was mine alone. The box was wrapped in plain paper, edges slightly crumpled from the weight of my hand pressing against it all night. I turned it over slowly, fingers trembling, the silence of the room amplifying the sound of the paper tearing as I unwrapped it. Inside lay a folded envelope, thick, yellowed slightly with age. My breath caught as I slid it open and pulled out the contents. Legal documents, deeds, signatures I recognized. At first, the words blurred as though my mind refused to believe them. But as I read line after line, clarity struck. My father, my silent, avoidant father, had left more behind than guilt and cowardice. He had left ownership, property, accounts, a share in the very empire my family believed belonged only to them. And by law, by ink and paper, it was mine. The room seemed to shift around me. The radiator's clanging softened. The draft from the window no longer bit as cruelly. The gift box, once just paper and string, had become the weight of power. I placed the documents carefully on the bed, smoothing the creases as though I were tending to something sacred. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, eyes tired, shoulders slumped, yet beneath it all, a spark I hadn't seen in years. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the papers spread around me, reading every line, memorizing every clause, tracing each signature with my fingertip as though touching the past. The clock ticked on, steady and relentless, but I felt no exhaustion. For the first time, I wasn't just a castaway. I was the storm on the horizon. The days that followed became a pattern of silence and planning. By day, I walked the gray streets, the air heavy with the scent of winter rain and exhaust from passing cars. I visited old family friends quietly, asking subtle questions. Some were surprised to see me, some wary, yet when I showed them the papers, their guarded eyes widened. They knew the truth. They had known pieces of it all along. At banks, I traced transactions, balances, forgotten accounts. In law offices, I listened to the scratch of pens against paper, the shuffle of files pulled from dusty cabinets. Lawyers leaned forward, adjusting their glasses, murmuring, "You have rights they never wanted you to know about." Their voices carried weight, but it was my silence that held more power. I nodded, said little, but inside, a plan was already taking form. Nights were spent differently. My apartment would grow colder after midnight, the radiator sighing itself into silence. I'd sit at the desk by the window with a notebook open, the pages filling with dates, words, actions, every slight they had inflicted, every decision they made without me, every betrayal I had endured. I cataloged it all. Ink on paper became my revenge, neat and organized, each line a reminder that patience would be my sharpest blade. There were moments of weakness, of course, moments when the weight of loneliness pressed so hard I felt I might collapse beneath it. In those moments, I would reach for the cracked mug I had brought with me from the old house. I would pour tea into it, watch the steam curl upward in fragile wisps, and remind myself, even broken things can hold warmth. Over time, sorrow hardened into resolve. I stopped replaying the sound of their laughter when they cast me out. Instead, I began to imagine the sound of their silence when I returned, not as the outcast, but as the rightful heir. It was then I began to notice their cracks, quiet victories hidden in plain sight. Through whispered conversations and documents uncovered, I saw it clearly. Their empire was not as unshakable as they believed. Accounts overdrawn, loans unpaid, investments reckless. They lived like kings on sandcastles, blind to the tide creeping in. I walked past their home once, on a gray afternoon. The lights were on, laughter drifting faintly through the window, but I no longer felt envy. Instead, I felt a calm certainty. They celebrated too soon. Their arrogance was their weakness, and their blindness would be my weapon. Each step I took from that moment on carried a different weight, no longer the shuffle of the forgotten, but the steady march of someone with time, patience, and truth. One evening, as the snow began to fall again, I closed my notebook and set down my pen. The documents lay stacked neatly on the desk, the small gift box resting on top, now empty but still symbolic. I leaned back in my chair, the dim lamp casting shadows across the room, and I whispered to the darkness. I was ready. The words lingered, settling into the silence like a vow. But deep inside, I knew. This was only the beginning. 1 year had passed, a year of silence, a year of patience, A year of sharpening the truth until it was sharp enough to cut. The evening of my return came quietly, wrapped in December's cold breath. The streets were glazed with frost, the sky hanging low and heavy with the promise of snow. Lights twinkled in windows as families gathered again, their voices rising in cheer. And somewhere, just beyond the bend of the road, my family prepared for another holiday dinner, unaware that this night would be nothing like the last. I arrived not with a suitcase this time, but with a leather briefcase. My steps were steady, my breath calm. I was not the outcast returning home in shame. I was something else entirely. My coat was dark, tailored, the collar turned up against the wind. My shoes clicked sharply against the stone path leading to the door, each sound echoing like a countdown. Through the frosted window, I saw them, faces familiar, yet foreign. They gathered around the long dining table, silver cutlery glinting under the chandelier. The fireplace threw golden light across their expressions, softening the lines of greed and arrogance. They laughed, glasses raised, their voices loud enough to cover the truth they had buried. I pushed open the door without knocking. The hinges groaned, and the sound rolled into the room like thunder. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused in the air, and slowly, every head turned toward me. The silence was almost sweet. I stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate calm. The warmth of the fire touched my skin, but it could not melt the cold resolve inside me. I stood taller than I ever had before, not because I sought their approval, but because I no longer needed it. "Well," my brother said finally, setting down his glass with a clink that betrayed his unease. "Look who decided to crawl back." His smirk wavered when I didn't flinch, didn't respond, only met his eyes with steady silence. I walked forward slowly, the sound of my footsteps filling the room. At the head of the table, a space had been left empty, perhaps by accident, perhaps not. Either way, it was mine now. I placed my briefcase on the table, the leather snapping against the polished wood. The sound echoed, final, cutting through the tense air. "I didn't come to crawl," I said softly. "I came to claim." A murmur rippled around the table, uneasy laughter trying and failing to disguise fear. My aunt shifted in her seat. My cousin glanced nervously toward the door. My father cleared his throat, but the sound died when I unlatched the briefcase. The papers slid out neatly, stacked with precision, their edges crisp despite the months I had carried them. I spread them slowly across the table, the crackle of parchment filling the silence. Titles, deeds, signatures, proof. "This house," I said, my voice calm, deliberate, "was never yours. It was mine all along." The words dropped into the room like stones into water, and the ripples struck every face. My brother's smirk collapsed, his lips parting in disbelief. My mother's spoon clattered against, her plate, hands trembling. My father leaned forward, squinting as though his denial might change the ink on the page. "No," my brother said finally, shaking his head. "You're lying." I slid one document toward him, the signature at the bottom, undeniable. He stared at it, color draining from his face. "You tricked us," my aunt hissed, her voice sharp, trembling. "No," I replied. "You tricked yourselves. You celebrated too soon. You thought I was finished. But the truth was here all along. You just never cared to look." The fire popped loudly, as if punctuating my words. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. My brother's face twisted with anger. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I already did," I interrupted quietly. My tone was not raised, yet it silenced him more effectively than a shout. "And you know what's worse? I don't even need to raise my voice. The truth speaks louder than anything I could say." I reached into my coat pocket and drew out the small gift box, the same one I had carried that night they cast me out. I placed it gently on the stack of documents. The room froze. They remembered it. I saw the recognition flicker across their faces. "This," I said, my fingers brushing the lid, "was meant to be yours. But you rejected me before I could place it in your hands. Inside was everything you tried to take. Now it comes back to me, not as a gift, but as proof." I opened the box, letting them see the folded papers inside, the seal still intact. Their breaths caught in unison. The weight of silence pressed down harder than any scream. My brother pushed back his chair suddenly, the legs screeching against the floor. His bravado cracked. "You can't do this to us. We're family." I met his gaze evenly. Family doesn't throw one of their own out into the snow with nothing but a suitcase. Family doesn't feed on sacrifice until there's nothing left. You chose greed over blood. Don't call it family now. My cousin spoke up then, his voice trembling. Maybe we can work something out." "No." I cut him off with a single word, sharp as glass. "There is nothing left to work out. The papers speak. The law speaks. The truth speaks. You had your chance to act with dignity. I will not give you another faces shifted around me, pleading, denying, blaming." My mother's lips trembled, but no words came. My father lowered his head, shame heavy in his posture. And my brother. His fury burned, but beneath it, fear flickered. I gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into the briefcase, the gift box resting on top. Then I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor as I pushed it back. "I don't need to stay here," I said, voice low but firm. "Because this house, this empire, this silence, it already belongs to me. Whether I sit at this table or not, you will never escape it." The chandelier light shimmered across there. Faces pale, broken, stripped of power. I turned toward the door, every step deliberate, my coat brushing softly against my legs, my shoes striking the floor with quiet authority. At the threshold, I paused, hand resting on the brass doorknob, the same cold metal that had once greeted me as an outcast. This time, it felt different. I looked back just once, meeting their eyes as they sat frozen in disbelief, their feast untouched, their laughter dead. "This isn't revenge," I said softly. "This is justice." And with that, I opened the door. The cold rushed in again, sweeping through the room, making the candles flicker, the fire bend. Snowflakes drifted across the threshold, dusting the polished floor. I stepped out into the night, the wind carrying my final words into the silence I left behind. The reckoning has only just begun. The night air was colder than I remembered, sharp enough to sting my lungs with every breath. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, catching the pale glow of the street lamps, spiraling down like fragments of broken glass. I stood in the middle of it all, coat drawn tight, briefcase in hand, staring at the house I had just left. Its windows still glowed with the warm orange of firelight, but inside, there was no warmth left. I listened. The night carried faint sounds, distant church bells ringing the hour, the muffled echo of car tires crunching over frozen roads, the hollow whistle of the wind weaving through bare branches. And beneath it all, silence from the house. No laughter, no music, no clinking of glasses. The feast had died the moment I placed the truth on their table. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. The scent of pine carried on the breeze, mingled with the faint smoke of fireplaces from neighboring homes. For years, that smell had been my comfort, a reminder of family, of gatherings, of togetherness. Tonight, it smelled different. It smelled of endings. But endings can be beautiful too. I began walking, my shoes crunching against the thin crust of ice, each step deliberate, unhurried. The snow swirled around me, glowing faintly under the lights, like ashes floating in the dark. My heart, once heavy, now felt strangely light. The weight of sacrifice, betrayal, silence, all of it had been carried for too long. Tonight, it slipped from my shoulders. As I moved further down the road, my thoughts turned, not to myself, but to them. My family, my betrayers. I could already see it playing out, the way cracks would spread through their once proud walls. Their empire, built on arrogance and deceit, was now paper thin. Social whispers would start tomorrow, carried like wildfire through town. Neighbors would speak in hushed voices. "Did you hear?" The house doesn't belong to them. It never did. Business partners would withdraw, banks would circle, friends would fade, and within those walls, they would turn on one another. I could almost hear the arguments already. My brother shouting, my aunt accusing, my mother weeping in a silence of her own making. They had been so strong together when I was their scapegoat, but now that the truth stood between them, they had nothing left to bind them. Poetic justice does not always come with thunder and fire. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of isolation, To be left with nothing but each other's betrayal, that was their punishment. For me, the aftermath was different. Nights became peaceful again. I no longer lay awake replaying their cruel words, or starving myself to feed their greed. My small apartment, once a cage, became a sanctuary. I lit candles without fear of wasting them, brewed tea in my cracked mug, watched the steam curl upward without guilt. Silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like freedom. Sometimes I would open the old family photo I had kept, the one where half my body was cut out of the frame. I used to stare at it with bitterness. Now I looked at it with acceptance. The photo had been a warning, yes, but also a truth. I was never meant to fit into their frame. I was meant to build my own. Other times, I would hold the empty gift box. Once, it had been a symbol of rejection, ignored, cast aside, hidden in my pocket like shame. Now it sat on my desk as a reminder. Even the smallest thing can carry power. What they rejected became the very thing that destroyed them. And sometimes, late at night, I would pour a drink into a heavy glass. Whiskey, amber, and sharp, catching the dim light. I would take slow sips, the burn running down my throat, and I would think of everything I had survived. I didn't drink to forget. I drank to remember, and to honor the fact that I had walked through fire and come out whole. Yet closure is never as simple as documents and victories. Closure is about choice. One evening, I returned to the house, not to confront, not to claim, but to end it. The snow was thick that night, muffling every sound. The driveway was empty, the house darker than I had ever seen it. I stepped up to the heavy wooden door, my hand resting on the familiar brass knob. The last time I touched it, I was leaving as an outcast. Tonight, I turned it as the rightful owner. The hinges groaned, the air inside cold and stale. I walked through the hall slowly, the sound of my footsteps echoing against bare walls. Their laughter was gone. Their arrogance had evaporated. The house felt hollow, abandoned even while they still lived in it. I moved to the dining room. The table was bare, the silverware put away, the plates washed clean. Yet I could still see it, the spilled wine, the smirks, the silence, the moment they cast me out. My eyes lingered on the spot where my gift had once lain unopened. The memory was sharp, but it no longer cut me. I walked to the fireplace, knelt, and touched the cold ashes. My fingers came away gray. Once, fire had burned here, full of false warmth. Now, it was dead. At that moment, I knew I didn't need to reclaim this house. I didn't need to sit at their table or wear their crown. What mattered was that they could never take from me again. I stood and walked to the door. I pulled it shut behind me, slowly, firmly. The wood groaned, the lock clicked. This time, I was on the inside, and they were the ones left out. Or, perhaps more truthfully, I was shutting the door not on them, but on my past. The snow had grown thicker, a curtain falling gently across the world. I walked to my car, its headlights cutting twin paths through the darkness. I started the engine, the low hum steady and sure. As I drove away, the tires crunched over fresh snow, leaving tracks that disappeared almost as quickly as they were made. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, its lights dimmer, until it was swallowed entirely by the night. And in that silence, a reflection rose inside me. Greed had destroyed them, betrayal had freed me, and revenge. Revenge had never been about shouting or violence. It had been about patience, about dignity, about letting truth breathe until it was undeniable. Sometimes revenge is not loud. It's the silence of truth finally being heard. The road stretched ahead, endless and waiting. My life was mine again. And I thought back to that night, a year before, when they placed a suitcase in my hand and cast me into the cold. I remembered the sting of rejection, the sound of the door slamming, the snow swallowing me whole. I smiled. On the night they cast me out, I thought I lost everything. But in truth, that was the night I began. The words lingered in the air as I drove into the darkness, headlights carving a path through falling snow. But even then, even in that quiet victory, a thought stirred in me like a shadow. Some stories don't end where we think they do.